I will try to go with the historical overview of the Slovenian structure of the Slovenian parliamentary system. When we are talking about Slovenia, Slovenia was part of the ex-Yugoslavia, and since 1991 has had a parliamentary system that is composed of the National Assembly, the Državni Zbor, and the National Council, Državni Svet. So the Slovenian parliament had features of an incomplete bicameral system, and which is based on asymmetrical duality. So the National Council has less authority and fewer competences than the National Assembly, in accordance with the constitutional chapter 4 of the Slovenian Constitution. So the National Assembly is described as a supreme representative and legislative institution, which is exercising legislative and electoral powers, as well as the control over the executive. So its members are elected every 4 years from 9 constitutes by universal, equal, direct and secret vote. So different specific rules applies to the elections of 1 member each of the Italian and Hungarian national communities. And the government of Slovenia is accountable to the National Assembly, and the Prime Minister is elected by the National Assembly by a majority vote of all of its members. So when it comes to the role of Slovenian Parliament in the process of transition adjustment of the legislation and accession to the EU, so actually the Slovenian Parliament played a pivotal role in the country's transition, legislative adjustments and accession to the European Union. So after gaining independence in 1991, Slovenia underwent a comprehensive political and economic transformation, where the parliament's responsibilities were crucial in ensuring a smooth transition to the democratic market-oriented system and aligning the national laws with the EU standards. So we can select it as a 3 separate process. So transition to the democracy, legislative adjustment for the EU alignment, and the EU accession process as itself. So in the transition, in the period of transition to the democracy, Slovenian Parliament was instrumental in establishing democratic governance. Following the dissolution of Yugoslavia, it helped frame and adopt a new new constitution, laying the foundation for parliamentary democracy with strong rule of law. So the main role of the National Assembly as a primarily legislative body enacted key reform to promote political pluralism, human rights and market economy. This included also privatization, judicial reform and strengthening democratic institutions as all vital for gaining international recognition and establishing Slovenia's credibility on the global stage. When it comes to the legislative adjustment for the EU alignment, a major role of the Parliament, of course, during this period was to harmonize Slovenian legal framework with the European acquis, the body of EU law that prospective member states must adopt. So the National Assembly introduced numerous reforms, including in areas such as trade, competition policy, environmental protection, human rights, and the labor law. This process required the overhaul of the entire sectors where the Parliament passed extensive legislative packages to ensure that Slovenia met the political, economic, and legal criteria for European membership. When it comes to the European Union accession process as itself, as Slovenia moved toward to European Union membership, the Parliament played a central role in the facilitating negotiations with the EU and overseeing the accession process. So it regularly revised and approved agreements related to EU accession and ratified numerous treaties and agreements that brought Slovenia law in the line with the EU regulations. So the Parliament also engaged in a public discussion and dialogues about the benefits and changes of the EU membership, helping to secure broad public support. So in 2003, the parliament called for and facilitated a national referendum where Slovenian citizens voted in favor of joining the European Union. And after securing public endorsement, the parliament ratified the accession treaty, leading to Slovenia's official entry into the European Union in 2004, 1st of May. So the Slovenian parliament was actually key actor in the shaping Slovenia's path to EU integration, playing a crucial role in the legislative reforms and international negotiations that ultimately culminated in the country's accessions. So when it comes to the role of Parliament concrete and on organizations in the EU affairs, including its working bodies, Slovenian constitution primarily refers specifically to the role of the National Assembly on EU affairs, and its Article 3 states that in cases relating to Slovenia EU membership, the government must inform the National Assembly promptly of proposing for EU acts and decisions, as well as its own related activities. So National Assembly may adopt position on the EU affairs, which the government must take into consideration. And several actors are involved in coordinating Slovenia's EU affairs, such as firstly the government, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Slovenian permanent representation in Brussels, working groups, and the National Assembly. So, but the main responsibility for the EU affairs produces and decision-making lies at the executive level. So that is coordinated by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and its Directorate for EU Affairs in particular. So the procedures are defined by the Act of the Cooperation between the National Assembly and the government in European Union affairs. This act actually determines the National Assembly participation in the formulation of Slovenia's position on the EU affairs. This document was firstly adopted in April 2004 on the eve of Slovenian EU accession, and has been amended several times since then in order to reflect Slovenia's developing a relationship with the EU and the National Assembly's role in these matters. In December 2010, for example, it incorporates provisions following the adoption of Lisbon Treaty to ensure more effective involvement of the National Assembly in decision-making process at the EU level and greater activity of its working bodies responsible in discussions of the EU affairs. So the rules of procedure of the National Assembly give kind of further guidance on on related proceedings. The latest update was made in April 2020, and it was followed by outbreaking of the coronavirus that created the possibility of holding remote session of the National Assembly and its working bodies. So neither the Constitution, the Operation Act, or the Act of National Council give the National Council a specific role regarding EU affairs. So its only competences regarding this matter are set out in the rules of procedure for both chambers. When it comes to National Assembly competence bodies on matters relating to Slovenia, membership are the Committee of the EU Affairs, where all EU affairs are debated and Slovenia positions on them are decided, with the exception of the EU's foreign and security policy, which is discussed by the Committee of Foreign Policy. This is set by in the rules of the procedure of National Assembly. So actually, National Assembly has kind of two different types of working bodies. It has like committees and commissions. But the committees generally corresponded to the ministry's areas of responsibility or cover several interrelated areas. So both of the committees are among the other 30 committees and two subcommittees, but they are the only one that are formally mentioned in the rules of procedure. And 6 standing commissions are mentioned in the rules of procedure. Others can be set up ad hoc or for special inquiries. So the CEU is currently composed of 70 members. Compared with the other member states' national parliaments, this is quite high number in proportion to total number of members. So this can be explained actually by the fact that the most members of Slovenia National Assembly belong to 3 committees and several commissions. So The composition of committee is proportional to the number of members of the political groups, while each political group is ensured at least one seat on each competent body. Members of European Parliament from Slovenia can attend to these and participate in these debates that are going on in the committees when they are dealing with the EU matters, but they don't have kind of voting rights. So several other people that are also invited to attend these meetings are the representatives of the government, representatives of the working bodies responsible, a representative of National Council, of European Parliament Liaison Office for Slovenia, and so on. When it comes to the work of Committee of European Union Affairs, it is supported by one civil servant that is acting as a secretary of the committee. So 4 advisors for individual areas and administrative assistant. Due to preparation for the Conference of Parliamentary Committees for Union Affairs of Parliaments of European Union, or shortly said COSAC, meetings in the second half of the year, and current work of the Secretary of the Committee is supported by 2 additional civil servants. One is in the charge of ongoing operation of the CAU, and the other is in charge of preparing COSAC meetings and chairing a special working group set up for this purpose. So the committee secretariat is responsible for organizing a committee's meetings, for supporting the president of the committee, preparing briefings and opinions, preparing documents and briefings for members, tracking attendance of ensuring following up with the members, as well as organizing meetings with the representatives of the EU institutions and other national parliaments. So the main task actually from the Committee of EU Affairs is to discuss, to debate, and adopt position on EU affairs when the government submits the affairs to the National Assembly for discussion, and the President of National Assembly refers them to the competent committee. So the both committees cooperate closely with the working bodies responsible and adopt decision on the basis of the opinions issued by them. Other competences of the Committee for the European Affairs are set out of the both the Rules of the Procedure and Cooperation Act, that includes discussing draft declarations or on orientations with regard to the activities of the Republic of Slovenia within the EU institutions, that are discussing issues on the agenda of EU institutions and bodies, and report by representatives of the Republic of Slovenia on EU-related activities, and also dealing with the EU issues related to structural and cohesion policy programs. Also discussing draft amendments to the EU treaties and conclusion of treaties, cooperating with the activities of National Assembly in accordance with the Article 12 of Treaty of European Union, and more specifically by ensuring compliance with the principle of subsidiarity and cooperating with the EU institutions and bodies and the EU affairs committees or other parliaments. When it comes to the committees, there is also important the National Council and its Commission for International Relations and European Affairs that is firstly established in 1998. And the Commission for International Relations and European Affairs is actually the body within the National Council that discuss EU matters. And it is one of the 8 National Council working bodies that send opinions for approval to the National Council or directly to the National Assembly and its working bodies. So the National Council holds regularly monthly meetings and convenes extraordinary sessions if a suspensive veto is proposed, or if matters cannot be postponed and have to be dealt with urgently. The main role of this commission is to examine any initiative and questions raised by its members in relation to foreign and EU affairs, and to prepare proposals for requests and opinions. It also discusses government's proposals, issues, opinions, and may pass them to the Committee of European Union Affairs, and at least 2 days before the meeting at which this committee is adopt a relevant position. When it comes to engagement and interaction with the EU, So debates on the EU affairs, the National Assembly occasionally discuss EU affairs in plenary sessions. And Article 11 of the Cooperation Act allows the plenary to discuss and adopt positions on draft EU legislative acts, providing certain conditions that are met. This can be requested by a minimum of 1/4 of the National Assembly members, the working body responsible, or by the Council of the President of the National Assembly. The highest level of involvement of the Slovenian National Assembly plenary concerned particular position on treaty changes and annual debating on the state of affairs in the EU. When it comes to the question of the role of National Council, so Council only discuss, when it comes to the questions of EU affairs, discuss only the following items at the plenary level, such as the presentation of the priorities of the rotating presidency of EU Council, the annual reports on the implementation of the EU budget by European Court of Auditors, and proposals for a declaration on the guidelines for the operation of the Republic of Slovenia in the institutions of the EU. The important thing is to mention the Barroso initiative. So Slovenia, when it comes to the contribution to EU policy by Jose Manuel Barroso, that was first one that invited national parliaments to react to EU legislative proposals in 2006. That time he was a president of European Commission, and Slovenian National Assembly and National Council have almost never used this possibility, however. So the rare contribution that were received by the European Parliament have been a letter from the late 2015 containing decision adopted by the Committee of European Affairs following a debate about improving the function of the EU, building on the potential of the Lisbon Treaty, and later from the 2014 with the position of the committee and both committees on the EU communication on enlargement strategy and main challenges. So to kind of summary this part, there are various possible explanations for the limit use of this tool. One of them is the lack of the interest on the part of National Assembly and the National Council in either influencing commercial proposals, branding themselves as an active parliament, or controlling the government. Another potential explanation is the lack of the resources, and the Slovenian National Assembly has not tended to be one of the national parliaments that pushing most for an expansion of the powers of European Union affairs. And according to the Közép report from 2015 that was asked about national parliament's position on creating a green card, which would give the national parliament's possibility to suggest a legislative initiative to the European Commission, and what scope should it have. Like all other responding national parliaments, the National Assembly agreed that they should be allowed to make suggestions for a new legislation or suggestion to amend existing legislation, but it was among the very few to be against also having the competence to make suggestions to repeal existing legislation or to suggest amending or repeating delegated or implementing acts. When it comes to scrutinizing the EU affairs and implementing EU legislation, so the Slovenian National Parliament scrutinized the government's work in the EU affairs primarily to these two committees previously mentioned. So committees review all proposed EU legislation and had the main focus on the government's position. These sectoral bodies, working bodies, provide an input that is based on the policy areas and submitting draft positions that includes the so-called impact assessment to the National Assembly that had to send in the period of 5 weeks of receiving an EU legislative act. And if the National Assembly doesn't debate on adopt a position, the government's draft become the official stance. So the Committee of European Union refers and votes on all government's position for the European Union Council meetings, and Slovenia requires a parliamentary mandate before the government can take a position. and the committee prepares reports for plenary discussion on EU legislative act. Sorry, just one thing before. Regarding the activity of Slovenian parliament in the early warning mechanism, the Slovenian National Assembly actually has produced only one reasonable opinion, or the so-called yellow card, since this mechanism was actually introduced, and that was the 2013 the proposal for the Council regulation on establishment of the European Public Prosecutor Office. But although there is often a strong relationship between institution strength and parliamentary activity within the national arena, the Slovenian National Assembly does not make much use of the early warning system, mechanism or political dialogue. The committee sometimes decides to carry out subsidiarity checks regarding selected announced draft of EU legislative acts, and also discussed some documents from the European Commission annual work program in the framework of political dialogue, but this almost never leads to the adoption of the specific documents. So another point to make relates to public scrutiny, and since amendments to the Cooperation Act was adopted in May 2010, deleted the previous Article 7, meetings of the National Assembly are public, and this created the conditions for the wider and strengthened kind of scrutiny. There is a lot of, okay, and I will try to conclude. In summary, you can say that Slovenian parliamentary system has an incomplete bicameral system, and whereas the National Assembly plays a central role in the EU affairs and is adopting positions and overseeing government's activities related to the EU. The Committee on the EU Affairs significantly shapes Slovenia's EU stance, and while the National Council rules is mainly supportive, but despite the established framework for engaging with the EU, both the National Assembly and the National Council utilize their opportunities for involvement, indicating potential disengagement, and the National Assembly tends to focus on scrutinizing government's positions rather than the EU proposals, and has only minimally utilized its mechanism for reviewing compliance with the subsidiarity. The National Council rules is limited to consultation, reinforcing the National Assembly central yet restrained position. But it could be said that Slovenia exhibits a cautious approach to EU integrations, emphasizing government's proposals and maintaining public scrutiny functions that has not been very effective. And thank you very much for your attention. I hope I didn't pass the time.